Well, hello. Welcome to our continuing devotional through the book of Colossians. We're currently in Colossians chapter 1, where we're looking at an extensive section that particularly focuses on the greatness of Jesus. And I have spent a little bit more time in these verses than I would typically spend. I hope that's been beneficial to you. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, as the old saying goes, that these are things you already hold to. But I think it's very important and that we can really never overemphasize the significance of who Jesus is. And as I mentioned to you a couple of devotionals ago, there has always been, from the time Jesus came, an effort to undermine, to minimize, to water down the greatness of Jesus. And once we do that, we really left the foundational truth of Christianity, which is who Jesus is and what he did. And if we don't get right who Jesus is, then everything else goes wayward from that point. So we're going to spend one more devotional emphasizing the supremacy of Jesus over all creation. In our next devotional, we will start talking about where Jesus fits in with the church and his headship over the church. But right now, let's go ahead and look at Colossians chapter 1, verse 17, which is a final phrase dealing with Jesus' supremacy over all things. And here's what it says about Jesus. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So this is the third verse emphasizing the supremacy, the greatness of Jesus. We saw that he's the very image of God, that he's the firstborn, that he is the creator of all things. All of that we saw in verses 15 and 16. But now in verse 17, it emphasizes that Jesus is not only the creator of all things, but he is before all things. And he's before all things in two ways. Jesus is before all things in time because he's existed forever. He's eternally existed. Everything else comes after him. And he's before all things in status. He comes before them. He's more important than them. Now, Jesus emphasizes his eternal existence. Even in the Gospels, he kind of shocked the religious leaders, offended them whenever they were interacting with him. And he said to them, before Abraham was, I am. So he's emphasizing before you think Abraham was something, and Abraham lived 2,000 years before me in my earthly existence, but before he was, I am. I've always been existed. Not just I was, but I have been and will be, and I've always been existent. He is eternal. And because of this the eternality of Jesus, he takes priority over everything else. He is the supreme one. Now, the Son of God is eternal. He has always existed, but Jesus became flesh. The Son of God became flesh in history, and that's where we use the name Jesus. So we're not saying the incarnation is eternal, but we're saying that the Son of God is eternal, and he became flesh. He entered into history. He became a man. And it goes on to say in verse 17, not only is he before all things, but it says, in him all things hold together. So Jesus created all things. They wouldn't even exist without him. They're created for him, as we saw in verse 16. That's the very purpose of creation. But here we're told that they exist only by his will. That he's the one that's holding everything together. And the idea here is without Jesus, it's chaos. There's no order. There's no life. There's no structure. There's no light. Jesus is holding the universe together. He holds everything together. And without him, there is none of it exists. None of it can have any meaning whatsoever. So Jesus is before all things, and he holds together all things. He created all things. All things exist for him. So if you take, and he's the image of the invisible God, and you take all this together, and you really are not left with any option, if you believe the Bible, any option but to just say there's no one like Jesus. There's none like him, we used to sing in worship songs. And there's no one like Jesus. So we can look at other people and admire different historical characters. We might gain some information, some encouragement, some instruction, but no one is like Jesus. He's supreme over all, and therefore he's supreme in my life, and I trust that he's supreme in your life. Have a blessed day.